Hi, everybody. I'm Jim. Welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. I'm continuing my little mini series of walking through The Great Conversation by Robert Maynard Hutchins. This is volume one from the Great Books of the Western World set, published by Britannica. And we're up to chapter 7 now. And chapter 7 is called The Education of Adults. In the previous episode of this series on Robert Maynard Hutchins and The Great Conversation, we were talking about Hutchins's views on liberal education for all, a goal that he would like to see achieved, one that he thinks is achievable, but one which the educational system as constituted may not be able to deliver on. So we turn in this brief chapter, it's just a few pages, to the education of adults. Hutchins and his fellow editors of the Britannica Great Books of the Western World set believe that their books should be the foundation of a liberal education for adults, and that this should be a lifelong pursuit of learning. On this score, he agrees with his counterpart, his sparring partner, John Dewey, that, quote, continued growth is essential to intellectual life. We can't depend on the education received in childhood to suffice because it is demonstrably insufficient. The educational institutions, K through 12 and undergraduate education and postgraduate education, either don't see the value of a liberal education, so they don't prioritize it, or if they may not be good at delivering it to the extent that they try at all. It's very piecemeal, it's very superficial. We pay lip service to liberal education, but we don't really do it the right way. Let me quote a paragraph where Hutchins sorts through the logic of his argument. The twin aims that have animated mankind since the dawn of history are the conquest of nature and the conquest of drudgery. Now they seem in a fair way to be achieved, and the achievement seems destined at the same time to end in the trivialization of life. It is impossible to believe that men can long be satisfied with the kind of recreations that now occupy the bulk of their free time. Robert Maynard Hutchins, let me bring you into the 21st century, and I think you will be amazed how people occupy their free time. After all, they are men. Man, though an animal, is not all animal. He is rational, and he cannot live by animal gratifications alone, still less by amusements that animals have too much sense to indulge in. A man must use his mind. He must feel that he is doing something that will develop his highest powers and contribute to the development of his fellow men, or he will cease to be a man. Okay, so that's sort of like laying out the fact that, we have this time available to us to indulge in liberal education like we never had before. But he recognizes that there's a threat here, that we are frittering away our time on idle recreations and he calls it the trivialization of life. Something I think maybe has only gotten worse over the decades. He also talks about public and private propaganda, how that makes it increasingly hard for citizens to form independent judgments. And presumably, a liberal education based on great books would counteract those forces, and we would have the critical capacity to discern the quality of information that we consume and have the strength to withstand the influence of the merchants of persuasion. So we need great books for adults. We need this now. Hutchins now leverages the idea of lifelong learning to probe how the education of children might be different and to reveal or expose why it is so faulty in its current constitution. Let's quote him again. This is from page 54. Here, the theory that education must meet immediate needs comes in to complete the chaos in our educational institutions. If the aim of education is to meet the immediate needs of the person educated, and if he is never to have any more education after he gets out of educational institutions, then he must learn everything he might ever need while he is in these institutions. Since there is no way of telling what the graduate might need, the only way out is to offer him a little bit of everything, hoping that he will find some bits useful. So the American high school and college are jammed with miscellaneous information on every conceivable subject, from acrobatics to Zimmergy, for who can say that some future high-wire artist or brewer will not be found among the students. The great wild proliferation of the curriculum of American schools, colleges, and universities is the result of many influences, but we can say with some assurance that if adult life had been looked upon as a time for continued learning, the pressure toward proliferation would have been measurably reduced. So we kind of have an elective system of education in a lot of ways. And he sees this as a problem, that we don't have that sort of back to basics, get the fundamental books, get that exposure down while you're young. And then if we had this assumption that you continue to educate yourself over the whole course of your life, then we would have time to pursue any interest we want, and including an engagement with great books. But of course, that's not really the way we do things. He next turns to the theme of the decline of the humanities. It so appears that this mantra that the humanities is on the decline is a perennial one. It's certainly a topic much discussed today, and Hutchins' discussion from 70 plus years ago feels strangely familiar. And the line goes like this: the humanities are being defunded at the expense of science and technology and professional schooling and whatnot. But Hutchins strikes a contrary tone here. Maybe he says money isn't the real problem, or lack of money. Maybe the problem is the humanities' lack of ideas and the humanities having the wrong priorities. I want to quote him again, where he sort of gets into the playing this out. It's sort of a what-if scenario here. The great issues are there. What is our destiny? What is good life? How can we achieve a good society? What can we learn to guide us through the mazes of the future from history, philosophy, literature, and the fine arts? These questions lie, for the most part, in the areas traditionally assigned to the liberal arts, the humanities, and social studies. If through this set of books, or in any other way, the adult population of laymen came to regard these issues as important, if scholars in these fields were actually engaged in wrestling with these problems, if in a large number of homes all over the country these questions were being discussed, then two things would happen. It would become respectable for intelligent young people with ideas, to devote their lives to the study of these issues, as it is respectable to be a scientist or an engineer today. And the colleges of liberal arts and scholars in the humanities and the social sciences would receive all the support they could use. So if there's no perceived value in the humanities, if it isn't addressing these big ideas, issues as I call them, then there's not much hope that it's going to get the funding it needs to sustain itself. But if the great books were read by adults in their homes, their value would be recognized and appreciated, because these books teach you how to think about how to live your life. And then maybe, just maybe, society would value what the humanities have to offer, and as he says, the funding would flow accordingly. To me, the logic of that argument is pretty sound, but in reality, speaking from a position looking out over 7 decades since he wrote this, we can see that this was the road not taken. Hutchins may not have realized the full extent to which the humanities would lose its way and hurl itself off the cliff into ridiculous irrelevancy for a number of reasons. It's a subject for another day. And meanwhile, the fad of the great book discussion groups, where adults were reading these books and talking about them, it seemed to be picking up steam around the time Hutchins was writing. That dwindled into obscurity. There's a few pockets of readers out there, but it's not the big movement that it once was. And there were economic strains that impinged on workers' available leisure time to read at all. And you have the rise of the two-income family and all the after effects that caused. And most of the available leisure time was taken up with the usual suspects. The boob tube, movies, video games, web browsing, social media, and apps. The trends that he was witnessing in the early 1950s have only become more amplified and morphed in some strange new directions. I guess I see the prospect of adults leading the way towards educational reform as a lost opportunity. That being said, I also see a new window of opportunity opening online right here. For instance, BookTube and other book-themed platforms. I know there's a demand for liberal education out there. I see you out there. And maybe we can use these platforms to discover one another and build a new community of readers where we can discuss ideas outside the boundaries of formal education. And that, to me, is where the action is, where it has to be. We don't have to give up the cause. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, in his next chapter, Hutchins is going to turn to world affairs and why a fast-changing world demands an engagement with the great books. Until then, I hope you like this episode and subscribe to the channel. And remember, there's a playlist with all the previous chapters devoted to discussing Hutchins's great conversation essay. Until next time, be well and read some great books. Thanks.